how about this? I launched a poll. If you guys want to go ahead and answer the question, how many people are in your accessibility team? So this webinar is 5 ways to get your team on board with accessibility. Let us know how many people belong to your team. We'd love to know. We find most often that the teams are smaller, but sometimes they are quite big. It looks like we've got several here that are more than 10, but it looks like 2 to 5 is kind of the norm here. I'm going to go ahead, and while everybody's answering that, we'll give you guys a minute or two to answer that. We're going to go ahead and get started because we want to leave some time for Q&A. And Chad and I will be monitoring the Q&A back and forth. So I'm going to go ahead and share screen, and I am going to share screen 3, share. There we go. We should be seeing our PowerPoint presentation, Chad. Are you seeing the?
I am. Yep.
It
looks good.
All right, Chad, take it away.
Well, welcome everybody. We're glad that you joined us for today's webinar on 5 ways to get your team on board with accessibility, because we know how much of a challenge this topic can be for those of us in the trenches and, trying to convince, other people's at our organization why accessibility matters and why it's so important. So if you're not familiar with us, we are Chax Training and Consulting. Our company is composed of Dax Castro, who you met earlier, and myself, Chad Chilius. And you can find out more about us at accessibilityunraveled.com. And feel free to email us with any questions or comments or anything like that at training@accessibilityunraveled.com. If you're not familiar with our podcast, that's really where we got our start.
Yep.
More than a year and a half ago now.
Yeah.
I think, Dax,
yeah.
Probably knocking on the door of 2 years.
Yep.
Check us out at chaxchat.com or on your favorite podcast platform, including, Apple, Spotify,
Google Podcasts.
There's
a whole litany. I mean, I checked the box for every one of those syndications and I was not shy about it. Somebody did point out, actually, though, Chad, on our on LinkedIn, and we love LinkedIn. So guys, if you want to reach out to us, find us on LinkedIn and reach out. We'd love to have you as a friend. But someone reached out and said, hey, I've been listening to your podcast for a couple months now, but I noticed that when I tried to search for you in the beginning, I couldn't find you. And they said they looked for Chax Chat or Chad or Dax, and nothing came up until they looked for A11Y podcast. And he said, why did you use such an obscure podcast name? And I said, well, in the beginning, who knew what Chax was as a podcast? So we decided accessibility, the shortcut for accessibility, is A11Y. And so I've since changed the name of the podcast to Chax Chat, but yet it takes a little bit of time for that to kind of propagate through all of the podcast platforms. So just be aware of that. So,
the channels,
awesome.
And last but not least, whether you're a Facebook user or not, we have a super active Facebook group called PDF Accessibility, and it's become just a really great resource where people can go and ask questions, and the overall community as a whole will answer your question, and a lot of really knowledgeable people on there. Dax and myself, we're on there all the time as well, but it's been really cool because the user base has grown and the knowledge has grown to a point now where people we've helped are now helping other people. So it's just a really great community. And if you're not, if you haven't gone there yet, please check it out. So what is accessibility? This is a question that we need to answer before we go any further, right? Before we dive in, a lot of times we dive in head first in how do I make a document accessible, or, how do I do the next task, without really understanding what is accessibility. And so the first paragraph here is a definition that really describes it pretty well. Digital accessibility is the process of making digital products. And by products, we mean websites, mobile apps, documents, or other digital tools and technologies accessible to everyone, right? Accessibility is all about equal access for all, right? So we want to make sure that our content is accessible to everyone. And providing all users access to the same information, regardless of the method that they may use to perceive or read that content. So that's really important to understand. That is fundamentally what accessibility is in the context of what we're here for today, which is, document accessibility.
So why is it so hard? Why, we're talking about the 5 ways to basically convince everyone else to do the thing that you are already doing, or you or your teams are already doing. Why is it so hard to get people on board with accessibility? Well, the first thing is it can be overwhelming, right? There's so much information out there. And when you don't understand accessibility at all, when people are throwing around terms like Matterhorn protocol and CAG 2.0 or 2.1 or section 508 or AODA, there's all these different terminologies, and there's color contrast and all these rules. And all of that can be just really honestly frightening for some people, because they just don't know how they're ever going to understand it all. For those of you who have been remediating for a couple of years, remember what it was like when you first started out. Where did you go to get all that information? It's kind of a little bit everywhere, and you pick up training as you go. And it's really about getting in the trenches. And, the PDF accessibility Facebook group wasn't around when I first started. I created it. So I didn't have a whole pool of users to go and, bounce ideas off of or get knowledge. It was literally attending conference after conference and doing some really deep dives on accessibility before I had a good understanding. The other thing is it can seem restrictive. I hear this time and time again. People say, oh, I can't make it pretty. I can't make it creative. I can't do this. I can't do that because of all the restrictions for accessibility. And the reality is, there are millions of colors and tons of options you can use to present content in a more accessible manner. It's just about understanding what those options are so that you understand the choices that are there. And of course, the programs we use can make it hard. They are why we have a job, right, Chad?
Yep.
We had somebody the other day saying, hey, I'm making all my stuff in Canva. How can I make that accessible? The answer was very difficultly. Yeah. Is that a word, difficultly? And, PowerPoint doesn't export things the way we expect. Word has its own idiosyncrasies. InDesign, of course, is probably the farthest along, but it still has some drawbacks, right? So all of these programs, there is no solution that's like, great, press the button and I'm going to get an accessible document, which makes it really hard, right? And then of course, if you're using a checker to check your accessibility, which I hope you are, you're either using the PAC checker or you're using the Acrobat checker. Remember, the Acrobat checker is just a starting point, but if it's all you've got, I get you. But the idea here, guys, is that, well, the Acrobat checker might say, oh, this is good. You passed. You're good to go. The PAC checker, which is a more of a technical standard, is going to tell you that, hey, you've still got a ways to go. And if you're trying to make sure that this document is readable for all screen readers or for the majority of screen readers, you have some more work to do. And in fact, these 2 screens are for the exact same document. Acrobat says, hey, you just need some alt text. PAC says, no, not so much. You've got some other things that you need to do. You need
some other things, right?
Right. There's some other stuff to do. And finally, the last one, change is hard, right? It is always hard to do new stuff. When you have to implement new ways of doing things, the old ways of floating text boxes or just using tables to lay stuff out, or all of the different things that people do that now mean something when it comes to creating accessible content, they have a hard time letting go of that. And how do you tell someone, hey, the way you've been doing, creating documents for the last 20 years is wrong, right? And we're going to give you some key tips on how to approach that very subject, right? So the first thing is awareness, right, Chad?
Absolutely. So, step one is promoting awareness about accessibility within your organization, right? Making people aware that it's a thing. And one way to do that is to let people know who accessibility is for, right? We have a tendency to, our first, the first group of people we think about when we talk about accessibility is people who are blind. And of course, you know, this is for people who are blind. And as a matter of fact, if we take a look at some of these statistics, there are 12 million people who are 40 years and over who have vision disabilities. And that includes 1 million people who are blind, right? But as we look at those numbers and the statistics, blind users is probably like the smallest group of people who is affected or impacted by accessibility. There are 48 million people out there who have a hearing impairment, 39 million people who have motor impairments, and 6.5 million who have cognitive impairments. So that's a lot of users who are impacted when we are making documents accessible. And the US Census Bureau projections in 2030, people 65 years and older will outnumber children, right? That's a huge group of people, right? That's a lot of users out there who are impacted. And by 2050, the number of blind and visually impaired people in the US is expected to double to more than 8 million people. So those are some interesting statistics for us to keep in mind as we are, you know, promoting accessibility in our organization. So have you seen some of the tools that are out there that can help us to promote accessibility and to help other people understand why accessibility is so important? There's a really great plugin that is free, by the way. It's called Funkify. And it is a browser plugin that simulates somebody who has like a motor skill problem. It makes it shaky as you're trying to like maneuver the mouse. It simulates tunnel vision. It also simulates peripheral vision as well. There's a great app called Sim Daltonism that simulates colorblind, you know, what it looks like for somebody who's colorblind, how they see a document or even a computer screen. And it simulates all of the different colorblind types, which is protanopia, deuteranopia, and tritanopia, with protanopia being the most common. Video, we have the PDF Accessibility YouTube channel, right? As well as the Facebook group, as we mentioned before. But if you check out our PDF Accessibility YouTube channel, there's a lot of great videos on there that shows like the experience of somebody who's using assistive technology, like a screen reader. There's a great blog by one of our good friends, Sherry Byrne Haber. She has an accessibility blog that you can check out, and she talks about a lot of really interesting and important topics related to accessibility. And then, of course, if you're on social media, use the hashtags A11Y or hashtag accessibility, and you'll just get a lot of great information out there on social media on those topics. And then, of course, there are also some articles out there too. Don't forget that. Head on over to creativepro.com. Dax and I actually just wrote several articles on accessibility that have recently been published over there, and just great areas to go for learning more. And
I just pasted that link in the chat. Hopefully awesome. everybody should be able to get at least see the chat, right? Can someone maybe post a question? You can see the chat. Okay, great, not a problem. All right. So the second thing we need to talk about, guys, here is celebrating the easy wins, getting those easy wins in and getting people started to starting to do the things that are required for accessibility. And because some accessibility is better than no accessibility. I know sometimes we strive for perfection, but we really should be thinking about what are some of the things that we can do to make things more accessible without having to be an expert, because not everybody's going to have the time or the inclination to want to make, to become an expert. And Chad's going to paste a link. We have the QR code here, but Chad's going to paste a link to the actual form where you can go get this top 10 things you can do to improve accessibility without being an expert. You just fill out the form and the link will pop up as soon as you're done, and you can download this document. But one of the first things you can do is title your document. And you don't have to be an accessibility expert to be able to do that. Understanding where and how to put the title in, that's a great topic for just getting people started in accessibility. Describing your images. Now, in some organizations, this might be harder than others because there might be more pushback. We've got some solutions to talk about here in a bit on how we can get people on board with that. Using headings. I think this is one, Chad, that is probably the one I think people could do them. It's the easiest to implement. It creates the biggest impact, and it requires the least amount of fixing at the end when you've created your PDF, right? Because we all know we can create headings, but I think the one thing that people tend to forget is about keeping them in order. And that sometimes when you have new people or doing accessibility, or at least trying to make their documents more accessible, sometimes they skip. But that's a small thing to fix, right? Avoiding excessive bullet levels, using descriptive links, avoiding images of text, keeping our tables simple, and avoiding faded color schemes. Maybe avoiding using the use of red and green as indicators. We call it the stoplight syndrome, right? Where we have something is red and something is behind, or bad, or there's a negative connotation to that, and something that's yellow is kind of at the thread of maybe becoming behind schedule, and something green might be on schedule. But if I'm colorblind and you use the same density of color, the same darkness or lightness value, then that color might look exactly the same to me. I might not be able to distinguish red or green, right? That's a bigger conversation, but at least starting to broach these subjects, and then using simple language. I know we all want to make things very flourishy, but we've actually got a document called Writing with Accessibility in Mind. And in it, the back page is an entire table full of word replacements, the 50-cent word on one side, and then the simple word on the other. So hopefully, raise your hand if you've already downloaded that document. Did you go get it already? It's one of the handouts that we hand out in almost all of our classes because it's so valuable in just trying to get people started, right? Awesome. Thanks for raising your hands, guys. All right, Chad.
So another thing you can do, and this is always helpful because companies are often really concerned with the bottom line, right? What the cost is of doing something. So what you could do is you could begin by tracking your time, right? Keep track of the time you spend fixing the same errors over and over again. Those are really easy wins, guys, right? You track what you're fixing, and then you can take approaches to making it easier to fix those problems moving forward. How much time will it take to fix this? How little changes could have saved 70% of that effort? Dax and I throw these percentages around all the time, but we really are passionate about this because a very small change can have a very significant impact in how much effort is required to make a document accessible. So keep that in mind as you're working on documents, track the time you're spending doing that, and then make adjustments to try to reduce that time moving forward.
One of the things I'll say about this, guys, is imagine that you've got a table, right? And someone decided that they're going to put merge celled rows in between this table about every 8 rows all the way down. And it's a 12 or 15 page table. how difficult would it have been for them just to simply copy the table and make a new table each time they needed one, rather than putting the merge cell? And I don't know if you've ever remediated those kinds of tables. It can take a substantial amount of time to make those more accessible if you don't have some of the extra tools like Common Look or Access PDF to be able to fix those tables kind of right away. If you're interested in those tools, let us know. We can definitely give you some demos, but definitely keeping track of your time and then going, okay, look, if we could have modified it this way, I would have saved 15 hours this month. Right. And that's tangible. Those are things that you can start to get buy-in from your supervisors to start getting people training, or to get people to start paying attention to implementing some of these tactics. Right. So the power of persuasion, Chad.
Yeah. So, as, part of what we do, we need to persuade other people regarding, why accessibility is important, why we need to do this, and why we should put the effort in. So a way to a person's heart is, as we all know, cupcakes. I'm just kidding. It's a joke. But what you can do to kind of facilitate the promotion of accessibility is set up monthly lunch and learns. And Dax and I can help you with that, by the way, right? I mean, we do lunch and learns for companies all the time. Keep your topics simple, right? You don't dive in real deep into accessibility. Grab the easy items, right? Focus on the things that are really simple, that will have a significant impact in the overall accessibility. Keep them simple, keep them relevant, right? Keep them relevant to the work that people are doing. Keep your guidance positive, right? This is a big one, guys, because we've all been in that situation where somebody's like, well, why did you do it that way, right? Or why are you doing it that way? If you keep it positive, people are more apt to receive that criticism or that suggestion. Give them the tools they need, right? Whether it's the color contrast analyzer, sim daltonism. There's all these tools that are available for us. Give them the tools they need to help them be successful. And always talk about the positives, right? Talk about the good things that you're seeing in what people are doing, and promote that and encourage them using that positive reinforcement.
All right. The last one is engaging without complaining, right? And I know that some of you raise your hand when you see one of these numbers that you have said, right? That's not compliant.
Or heard.
Right. That's going to fail minimum color contrast, right? Why did we make the table that way? And that'll never pass the checker. And did you add alt text to that? Right. I know that when I first started out doing accessibility, that there were times where I would get so passionate, maybe would be the right word, about accessibility, that people would almost cover their screens as I walk by. Or I'd walk by and start to look at their screen like, no, I haven't made it accessible yet. I'm still working on that. They would, because I was so, I don't know, the parking attendant. I'm not trying to figure out. I don't want to say meter maid because that's not the appropriate term anymore. But I was the Sheldon Cooper of accessibility, right? I was literally that guy. And the outcome of that was not positive. And it took me a bit to really kind of adjust, right? So I found this is a way to approach positive influence, I will say, right? And this is a way that I found has worked for me. I start with a compliment. I offer a solution, and then I end with an affirming question. And I think that ending with an affirming question really is the key here, right? And I just did it, right? Because you want to get that buy-in from that other person. Okay. So let's take an example of what that looks like. So hey, that looks great. And somebody else says, thanks. I said, if we made it just 10% darker, people with low vision could see it better. What do you think? And the answer most of the time is sure, or okay, or let me think about that, or let me figure out some colors, or what do you suggest? They put it back in your lap, right? And it's usually a positive reaction that you get. Not always, but most of the time, that last little bit is the kind of the hook that kind of doesn't allow them a way to kind of push back and have that negative experience. Also, the fact that you didn't walk up and just say, that's too light, it's never going to pass compliance. Or, didn't you read our color brand style guidelines on color contrast? So having a positive tone and a positive message really helps eliminate or reduce the amount of pushback you get. Or, maybe it's, can we try it out, right? Maybe it's, hey, what do you think? Can we give this a shot? And their answer is probably going to be sure. I don't know any of them like, no, we can't do that. Maybe it's because you're on a time crunch, but most of the time it's pretty easy to change a color. Another example here is, I love that table. Thanks. Is there a way we could simplify it to make it a bit more, to make it more easy for people to read? And the answer to that is no. Right? As soon as you give them that open-ended, hey, I'm going to push all this on you. I'm going to have you try to figure out what the solution is. I'm just telling you there's something wrong with it. You've got to go fix it. The hard part here is it's almost always met with pushback. It's almost always you get a negative connotation. It's like when someone walks up to you and says, hey, would you like to buy? And before you even get to the next word, you already know your answer is no.
No, right. Yeah.
No, the answer is no.
Guys, I'd like to share, I was working with a client one time on this topic. We were talking about a table, and the table was pretty complicated. And I sat down and I was talking with the client about the table. And as we were talking, the client said, you know what? We don't even need that row, right? And so my point of telling you that is that accessibility often forces you to evaluate a table or an element where previously you've just kind of like let it go, right? Or this is how we've always done it and we keep doing it this way. But accessibility kind of forces you to evaluate it and often can help you to make some really wise decisions about possibly simplifying something or making it easier to read. Dax, we got a question from somebody who says they work for a large university, and at times they're advised that it's the university's job to make sure our content is accessible, but they're the ones creating and maintaining our sites and content. She's asking, what's the best way to respond to someone in a leadership position saying accessibility isn't our job? Well, you all work for the same company, right? And, an organization such as a university, their incentive for accessibility is often to avoid a lawsuit, right? I mean, let's just be real about this, as much as we want to think that people are making content accessible because it's the right thing to do, in reality, money talks. And, I think I would explain to them that, that there is potential for a lawsuit if we don't make this content accessible. And saying that it's the university's job is certainly the wrong approach, because you've probably heard Dax and I say many, many times, accessibility's got to be done at the beginning of the process, not at the end, right? You can't just say, here's a PDF, make it accessible. That's a horrible approach, right?
Well, I think to go more into the logistics of the question, right? It says, at times we're advised that it's the university's job to make sure our content is accessible, but we're the ones creating and maintaining our own sites and content. What's the best way to respond to someone in a leadership position saying accessibility isn't our job? I guess my question to you is that, and maybe you can post a follow-up question, is that the leadership is saying that it isn't their job, or it shouldn't be your job as content creators, right? Because there's two different ways to look at this. It's everyone's responsibility to create accessible content. And I think this goes back to time. This goes back to that slide that we had, right? Being able to go back to, let's go back to that slide, right? When we talk about how much time will this take to fix? So if no one's doing accessibility, right? And everyone is just saying at the end here, accessibility team, make it accessible. Well, if you are so overworked that your backlog is crazy and you're not able to get your work done on time, imagine if they just simply did these three things. If they added alt text, use styles for their headers, and I don't know what the third one would be that would be super simple. Alt text, headers, and didn't use tables to lay out content. That would be like 70 or 80% accessible right out of the gate, right? And it's having those conversations where you can kind of start to talk about, hey, what does this workload really look like? And how can we spread this out that really can make a difference, right? So I think that's a great, at least an approach. And you can follow up if you'd like. But Alice has got a question. Have you had any experiences where your clients ask you for a checklist of things to consider when creating documents? If so, what did you suggest? So if the client is coming to you saying, hey, do you have a checklist for me as I'm creating this stuff? What do I do? Chad and I definitely have checklists. I mean, it's part of kind of what we do is we come up with checklists for InDesign, checklists for Word, checklists for Acrobat, getting a best practices manual together. We have a vendor worksheet that allows the vendor to sign off and say, I certify or I attest that these things are done and that we've gone through these steps to make our content more accessible. So yeah, definitely good question.
We got some other one, Dax.
Yep.
I'm not on an accessibility team, but work to regularly incorporate accessibility in my work. I find that when I bring up document accessibility with my team, I end up taking on the work to make the document accessible. What are your suggestions for navigating this dynamic? Well, I would say, education, I don't want to sound corny when I say this, right? But accessibility really is a team effort, right? Like we're all involved in this process and we all have to be involved in this process. I mean, the tip sheet that we gave you here, right? The 10 things that you can do, right? They are very, very fundamental things you could do. And even taking those steps can have a significant impact on the accessibility of the document. Dax and I say all the time, document accessibility is a combination of manual and automated checks to achieve accessibility. But, taking these 10 simple steps can get you from like 0 to like 50, right? I mean, at the very least, you've incorporated some really important things into that document. They're going to have a big impact on the accessibility of that file.
Guys, I'm going to let you all in on a little secret, and it's a big secret. Accessibility is, if you were to not even mention accessibility at all and just talked about how do we use Word, InDesign, PowerPoint the right way, you would solve like 80% of the accessibility issues in your documents. So to this person who says, how do I get out of the trap? How do I not fall into the trap of saying, hey guys, we should all care about accessibility. Here are the things we should all do. And everybody says, okay, great, you do it. It should be more of a conversation of, guys, we need to work more efficiently with Word. We're all having to highlight stuff and make it bigger, make it smaller, make it, we're missing things and things are going out inconsistently. Can we all start using styles so that we can get everything kind of in a consistent presentation? And the use of styles then solves your accessibility problem. So it's, about all of that. Do you want better search engine ranking for your documents online? Hey, how about we make, add some metadata to our documents, create a meaningful title for our documents. Oh, well, if that improves search engine ranking, sure, why not? Well, it also improves accessibility too, right?
Yeah.
So, all of that. Awesome. So the next question is, given the current enormous downturn in college enrollment, another hook would be to point out that being more accessible may encourage students with accessibility issues to choose your college. Yes, absolutely. This is definitely a thing. Also, it really shows where your priorities lie. And Chad said earlier, the access to information is a fundamental human right to be able to have access to the information around us. And when your college puts that in the forefront of its processes, it really stands out. So Max says checklists are awesome, and vendors and that vendor affirmation would be cool to be able to take a look at. Do you have those available on your website? Max, when you fill out that form, you can either fill out a contact form or follow us on LinkedIn or friend us on LinkedIn, and we can definitely talk more about that. But yes, we do develop those, and we literally talk with you. I mean, this is not to turn this into a sales pitch, but we'll talk with you about what it is you're trying to accomplish and what they're typically not doing, and whether your standards AODA or HHS or whatever it happens to be, and we can help you definitely put that together. Alice is talking about the best practices. And then we have the last one here, this anonymous. I work in higher ed too. Accessibility is everyone's job in the public education. Content creators do have a role to play. Admin folks need to understand policy and support content creators with the right tools, training, and time required. I could not agree more, right, Chad?
Yeah. 100%. I mean, the content creators not only have a role to play, their role is the important role, right? I mean, because that's where accessibility needs to start. I've said this 100 times, that the worst approach is content creators create the PDF, they pass it off to somebody else and say, make this accessible. It's a horrible approach, and it's not sustainable, and not at all.
No, you get burnout. I mean, if you're the one always doing it, you're always going to get burnout. But again, I feel like my shield for accessibility is, look, guys, 90% of this, 80% of this is just using the program the right way. How about we not copy and paste stuff? How about we just use styles? How about we, alt text is probably the only thing I can think of that isn't a basic, this is what we should be doing to all our documents, right?
Yeah.
But it's going to help you with SEO. So why not do that too? On the screen here, we have, guys, you can catch us at Adobe Max or Accessing Higher Ground are the next two places we're going to be. If you want this card that's on screen happens to be a two-sided postcard. And on one side, it has some common tags that you might encounter for accessibility, and then some common definitions, and they can really help you kind of start that conversation with other people. The opposite side of the card has our NVDA shortcuts list, which you can keep handy at your desk. So in case you need to kind of reference those, because you should be testing your documents with a screen reader. This is a great card. So you can either download it digitally. If you go to our website, you'll see it at the very top of the screen. I don't think you can see my mouse up there. Download accessibility reference card download, right? Document accessibility reference card download. I can read today. And you can get this, right? Or check us out. I'm going to be speaking at Adobe Max on literally the entire cadre of Adobe programs that have an accessibility component. I'm just going to touch on each one so that people are aware. We're talking about awareness here today, right, guys? Aware of the fact that there are things like captions inside of After Effects, or that you can use a third-party plugin to create captions from your After Effects files, or maybe that Photoshop has a color contrast analyzer, or a colorblind simulator inside it, right? Those types of things. So if there are more questions, we'd love to hang around and ask those, answer those for you. But we do want to be respectful of your time. There's about 10 minutes left here, or 5 minutes left, to answer more questions, and we'd be happy to do that.
Sherry Nelson had one more question in the Q&A. She said at her organization, the latest staff favorite is links to Google Docs and Google Sheets, which pose a security risk to the websites or are being phased out.
Right.
And she said there will be apoplectic fits. Sherry, I had to Google that. I didn't know what it meant, but yes, you're probably right. There would be, and it's worth mentioning that there is a product out there called Grackle Docs that allows you to create accessible PDFs from your Google Docs and Google Sheets. So that might be a way that you can, kind of satisfy the requirement, for people who are trying to share those links.
Chad, that reminds me of another topic here. The idea, I'm going to stop sharing screen here so we can have some camera time here. The idea that a source doc is the myth that a source doc is more accessible than a PDF, right?
Yeah.
We hear this all the time. Well, I don't have time to make it accessible. Just post the source doc. That's going to be more accessible, right? And the answer is no. If you don't build the accessibility features into the source doc, just because it's live text doesn't mean that it's going to be any more accessible than the PDF. In fact, oftentimes, if your table uses merge cells like in Word, the whole idea of no merge cells in Word really stems from the fact that when you have a source document that is Word and you have merge cells in it, Word will not let the AT, the assistive technology, read that document table correctly because of the merge cells. If you had it in a properly remediated PDF, you would be able to allow it to read that complex table. So there's some times where just because it's the source doc doesn't mean it's accessible.
Yeah, I've taught a lot of classes where some of the people attending have said, "Oh, well, we already know that we can't merge cells in a table." And I'm like, not the case. I mean, the PDF format is very robust, and we can absolutely make merge cells in a table accessible. Not a problem.
Alice asked, can you talk about STEM content and accessibility and how to discuss this with content creators and also along the lines of best practices? So STEM is a really hard thing, right? Because we're talking about mostly when we think of STEM, it's really equations, right?
Yeah.
There's math ML, math type, there's different formats you can present the equations in. There's third-party websites that allow you to take a math ML or a math type equation and paste it into this configurator, I guess. I don't know if that's the right word, but then it would allow students to explore the different pieces and parts. But inside a PDF, we're just not there yet. And it's a shock kind of why, but we just aren't. And it just because the portable document format, PDF, is really never designed to be this mini web page or this mini app that sometimes people tend to want to make it. It was really designed to be able to take a print document and distribute it in the same format in which it was created. So
we have a question from Darren, who said his university is trying to remove PDFs from the web and when appropriate, create them as HTML pages instead. Yeah, sure, Darren. I mean, there's a lot of times where, HTML can be made very accessible. The problem I always run into this, because there's a lot of people who have a very hard line approach to this, and they're like, there should be no PDFs, everything should be HTML. And that's great. The problem is that the everyday user cannot create a web page, right? All of that task falls on IT or somebody within the IT department to build that web page. The average user can't just whip up a web page and say, "Okay, guys, here you go." It's not possible. So, people who say like that they're trying to like just eliminate PDF altogether, I think it's a short-sighted approach, to be honest. You know, we know, and I'm here to tell you, the PDF file format is incredibly accessible. And people who promote it as being too hard, I think don't really understand, right? They really don't understand what it takes to make a PDF accessible. Well, so, you know, I understand what you're saying, and that's all well and good, but again, I mean, the burden of creating those web pages is going to fall on somebody else, right?
Well, and there's times, a lot of it has to do with the timeline of how long it takes to create the HTML and who has to approve it, and how does it get integrated into the website. I think there's a whole workflow issue that goes along with there too. But there's plenty of times where I've taken a 50-page table, and instead of presenting it as a PDF, I put it as a dynamic HTML file on the web. I'd much more have that than have to deal with it inside 50 pages worth of table. Guys, we are at time. We thank you so much for taking the time to attend this webinar. We've got lots of classes at accessibilityunraveled.com. You can check us out on our different conferences that we'll be at. And we just would love to hear from you. We understand your struggles, and we appreciate you taking the time out. And if you've got specific challenges with your teams that you'd like us to help solve, please reach out to us, training@accessibilityunraveled.com. We'd love to help you. Thank you so much. And we'll send you out an email with a link to this video once it's posted. So we appreciate you.